Thank you for joining us today for our ASOR Early Career Scholar Virtual Fall Brown Bag. I'm very happy to welcome our three panelists for today's session on how to get involved in archaeological field projects. James Osborne, Catherine Kearns, and Nicholas Brown. Thank you so much for joining us. Our session today will begin with a small set of predetermined questions for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to an open Q&A for the last portion of the hour. Before we get into the topic of field projects and dive into our session, I want to invite you all to our Early Career Scholar events at the 2025 annual meeting next month in Boston. The committee will be hosting an in-person brown bag lunch on Thursday, November 20th at the lunch hour in the Georgian Room. So please bring lunches and join us for presentations, a panel discussion, and a Q&A on applying to ASOR and ASOR-affiliated scholarships. There we'll host representatives from several fellowship committees to discuss available funding options through ASOR and related organizations, and also how to submit drawing applications. So that's one not to miss. We'll also be hosting a first time at ASOR meetup in the afternoon coffee break on that Thursday. The location should be announced shortly in a program and on our social media platforms. So if it is your first time joining us for an ASOR annual meeting, do join us for that. Next, an invitation to our annual Early Career Scholars reception, Friday evening in the lobby of the Conference Hotel from 8 to 10 p.m. Registration is required for that event. So the link is right here. It's on our socials and posted in several other places. So make sure to register ahead for that. And we'll see you to celebrate our Early Career Scholar selves on that evening. And finally, we have a dedicated room in the hotel if you need a break, to hang out for a bit with a friend, practice your presentation, scream into the void, whatever you need. All this can be done in the Beacon Hill room on the 4th floor of the Hilton Plaza Hotel in Boston. This room will be available throughout the whole conference, especially for those who are not staying at the hotel, who maybe need a minute away or a place to sit and quietly answer some emails. So please do feel comfortable to take advantage of that. All are welcome. For those unfamiliar with our corner of the ASOR website, I just wanted to point out that you can find some Early Career Scholar resources under the Membership and Resource tab. These are resources for job searches, fellowships, and most of our virtual talks are linked there, recordings of those. So if you aren't already following us there or on Facebook and Instagram, our information, our events, postings and things can be found there. At our Facebook page and group, on our Instagram. And then if you're curious about any of our committees, I'll share that link here right now. All right. That's all of our announcements for now. So without further ado, I want to again welcome our panelists for today's brown bag. James Osborne is an associate professor in the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures at the University of Chicago. He is an archaeologist who works in the Eastern Mediterranean and Ancient Near East, focusing on the Bronze and Iron Ages, particularly in Anatolia. He currently co-directs the Turkmen Karahoyuk Archaeological Project. We have Catherine Kearns, an associate professor in the Department of Classics of the University of Chicago. She is an archaeologist who works on the intersections between social and environmental change in Mediterranean landscapes. In recent years, she has co-directed fieldwork on Cyprus through the Kalavassos and Moroni Built Environments Project using geophysics, field survey, excavation, and geospatial analysis to identify Iron Age rural settlements. And Nicholas Brown is a postdoctoral associate and lecturer at Yale University. He is an Egyptologist and archaeologist and the co-director of excavations at the site of Deir el-Balas, an ancient royal palace and military outpost just north of Luxor in Upper Egypt. He is also currently running an ongoing research project in the Valley of the Kings to re-examine and republish the tomb of Tutmosis IV. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your field project wisdom with us. For those listening, please feel free to enter questions in the chat throughout the session, which our panelists can try to address during our Q&A at the end, or save questions until then and feel free to open cameras and ask directly. So at this point, I'll turn it over to our panelists to give a little introduction about their own field experiences and what they've been up to recently in fieldwork. So I'll turn it over to Katie to get us started.
Hi, everyone, and thanks. Yeah, you can call me Katie. Yeah, I guess I'll just give like a brief overview of fieldwork experience. So I started in a very typical field school in Italy, learning a bunch of different techniques as an undergraduate. And then as a graduate student, the project that really set me on the course for my dissertation was this geophysical survey project. So that just happened in the kind of like learning what your advisor works on. And that was on Cyprus. That was exploring late Bronze Age urbanism. And it was a really interesting way to learn a different technique, a different kind of skill set. And out of there, my own interests in Iron Age Cyprus developed, and I was able to kind of splinter off and do my own pedestrian survey project as a graduate student, as still part of this sort of like broader multi-institution fieldwork project on Cyprus. So that was with Cornell and UBC. And that allowed me to build the kind of connections on the island to do pilot excavations. So the project that I've been directing over the last 5 years has been built out of the dissertation work and testing rural sites on Cyprus. So bringing my own students, finding my own funding, and combining things like pedestrian survey, geophysics, and excavations on a number of sites. So maybe that's just like a brief overview, and that's the project focuses on the Iron Age, on the Archaic and Classical periods. Yeah, I'll kick it to James.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm James, and as Vanessa said in the introduction, the site that I co-direct for my field project is in Turkey, and so I'm now an Anatolianist, but I wasn't always. I started getting interested in the ancient Near East as an undergrad, mainly in the context of biblical archaeology. And my first field school was in the Jordan Valley at a Bronze Age site, and that was a lot of fun way back in 2000 now. It's kind of hard to believe. And then I went to grad school intending to do that, actually. Like I thought I would stay working in Israel Palestine for the rest of my career. And as it happened in my first year of graduate school, there was conflict in the area, and my PhD advisor, couldn't go to his dig in Ashkelon. And so instead, I just randomly joined a project in Turkey, really just to gain field experience for the summer, and fell in love with the archaeology of Turkey and decided to stay there. And so I did my dissertation at that site in the end, and I stayed there until about 2015, and then branched out to start my own survey and eventually excavation elsewhere in central Turkey. And maybe we'll talk about this later, but unlike in Cyprus, Turkey has a lot of restrictions on who is legally allowed to do project work. By which I mean start your own project, like direct a project. It's actually very, very difficult in Turkey just to meet the bureaucratic requirements of being eligible to gain a permit to start an excavation. So it took a long time to get that off the ground. But now it exists, and yeah, there's no looking back now. And it's a major excavation project sponsored by University of Chicago and Bilkent University in Ankara. You'll hear more about it, I'm sure. But in the meantime, Nick, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and just really looking forward to chatting with everyone. Yeah, so I have been working as an archaeologist in Egypt since 2011. My first field experience was actually in January during the Arab Spring, so it's been eventful ever since. But yeah, no, I've gone on this kind of crazy path to where I'm at today with really great opportunities that mentors gave to me, and so hoping I can kind of pass on some of that knowledge to all of you today. My two main projects in Egypt are the tomb of Tutmosis IV in the Valley of the Kings, and then a settlement site at Deir el-Balas, which is just north of Luxor, about an hour's drive. So two very different kind of archaeologies, right? One is a royal tomb that's already been excavated, and then the other is a settlement site. So daily life. and whatnot. But I think the core of my research as an archaeologist in Egypt is trying to um, focus on kind of a sustainable archaeology is kind of what I term it or like to call it, where it's not just doing new field work and new excavations, but it's also revisiting sites and monuments and places that have already been excavated, have existing excavation archives, and also monuments or materials that need focus on preservation and conservation and care as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing all of that with you.
Thank you all so much. So I'll start our first round of questions with the basic question of how does one find an archaeological project and more specifically the right archaeological project for their particular stage, maybe in their education or at their experience level.
Would you like us to go in order as we did, sort of taking
Sure, yeah, that
turns?
sounds good.
All right, then I'll let Katie start again, and I'll go next.
Perfect.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. No, so I'll give a kind of introduction to Mediterranean archaeology. I think what we're going to hear throughout the discussion today is that there are regional differences, but I think it's important as the question is framed to think about level and training. So are you looking for basic training in a particular method? Are you looking for specialized training? Have you decided like a sort of region or period that you're really interested in which case you're narrowing down projects that would expose you to the kind of real empirical dilemmas of the region or period that you want to study. So the particular ceramic typologies or the actual landscapes. So that, you don't want to start with it depends, but these are some of the questions based on where you are and what you're looking to get out of a project. There are sort of massive aggregative databases of projects that are looking for help. So things like the Archaeological Institute of America has a database, the Institute for Field Research has a database. So this is where projects can post. We're going to have a season, June 25th to July 25th, and we're inviting students to join. And they'll often give you the kind of breakdown of what you might, the kind of skills or the training that you might get there, as well as visits to other sites in the region or particular lectures or training on the history of a region. As graduate students, if there are people on the call, part of the way that you can learn about projects is by talking to advisors. So, like building up relationships with mentors and advisors who might have their own projects. And this is where the sort of importance of things like networks come in, because maybe I can't take students, but I know that my colleague James Osborne can take students or Nick Brown can take students. So building up that kind of relationship with mentors and advisors and learning about what's out there, again, that might suit your particular needs or interests. So like I mentioned, like I joined a geophysics project. That's not because I was looking necessarily to learn how to become a geophysicist. It was partly that my advisor needed students and I thought it sounded really interesting and a good way to learn a new skill set. So there are ways that you can kind of start to break down what you want to get out of a field project. And then working with advisors to sort of narrow down ones that might be accessible or available. And then it's like, yeah, building up and working with those kind of networks and connections. Some field school projects, for example, just take straight up applications. So you could think about, do I need course credit for this? Will it, transfer? Others, it's much more sort of colloquial, like I heard you needed students, or, like working to email project directors to find if there's availability. Maybe I'll kick it to James there and we'll see if there are particular questions.
Well, that was great. First of all, I don't have too much to add in terms of the considerations of what you're trying to get out of a project. I would just geographically add that in Turkey, there's a tremendous variability in the nature of projects there, and that's because of the variability of the cultural record of Turkey. I mean, it's a massive country. And I always tell students in my archaeology mandatory class that the landmass of Turkey is larger than the landmass of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq combined. And when you think about how many sites are in those countries and the different communities of practice that exist in the archaeology of those countries, you get a sense of what it's like in Turkey. And there's just really different communities of practitioners there. Maybe most conspicuously between so-called Near Eastern archaeologists and so-called classical archaeologists. And the people who are interested in classical archaeology tend to work on the western and southern coast, the Mediterranean and Aegean coast, basically. And then pre-classical archaeologists tend to work inland. And those communities interact a lot less than you might think. So yeah, you just need to be cognizant of that, I guess, and add it to the list of items that Katie just offered about the kinds of things that you need to be aware of, where your interests lie before you randomly join a project in Turkey, because you might end up accidentally on something that actually is quite different from what you had in mind, different from what you thought you wanted.
Yeah, no, I think I totally have to agree with everything that Katie and James have said so far. I can just add that a couple different things that I'm thinking of regarding this question. First and probably most important, and hopefully most obvious, is if you're studying to be an archaeologist and really interested in a career, I absolutely recommend to my students, you have to get out in the field and make sure that you actually enjoy it. Life on an excavation is a lot different than life in the classroom or in an office back home. That being said, I think it's super fun. I love it. So I hope, a lot of you will enjoy it as well. So I think that's kind of like one of the big things is, yeah, definitely make sure to get field experience if you can. And then how to do that exactly. Yeah, that's it. Challenging question. I mean, so my undergrad, I was studying just general archaeology, but I had always known that like Egypt was an interest and I wanted to get over there to try it out. And so my experience, I actually applied for a field school for university credit through, at the time, it was the UCLA Coates Institute was offering like a number of field schools. I think today there's other groups that do something similar. There's the Institute for Field Research, as well as I'm sure there's others that are out there that I'm just blanking on at the moment. So the unfortunate thing about those is they do often cost quite a bit of money. So there can be that financial barrier. If you're in a position to get scholarships or financial help to do those, that's one way to try to get practical field experience. Again, I agree with Katie and James about, talk to your mentors, talk to your undergrad advisor or a close professor, and see what they would suggest. Do they know someone? Do they have a colleague who can bring you on? Do they have a project that they might have an opening for as well? And I would say, the last thing too, when trying to figure out, field research and, what's the right fit, be open to trying different jobs when you're on a project and in the field. So I've done everything from drawing pottery to excavating in a trench to using geophysical survey equipment to kind of map, sites without actually putting a trowel to the sand. I can say 100% geophysical survey is not for me, and that's only because I've tried it. Definitely important. It's really cool stuff that can happen from it, but I'm just not super computer savvy with all the mapping and everything. So for me, that didn't work out. But yeah, just be open to trying out different things. And I like drawing pottery, for example. That was a skill set I acquired, which I then could take to other projects when I was trying to join other excavations. I could say, hey, I can, dig in the trench during the day, and at night I can draw pottery for you all, as an example. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Maybe you could all address what it means to join accredited field school that maybe some programs actually require versus just being able to go out and have that experience that would add to the resume.
Yeah, I can maybe cut the line really quick since I just mentioned, if that's okay, Katie.
No, go.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was at UC Santa Barbara, and they offered credits that could be transferred from other UC institutions. So when I did my field school through UCLA and through the Coatson Institute, that was kind of the Archaeology Institute at UCLA had kind of officially credited this dig that I was going on, partnered with them to bring students. And in that case, I was able to get university credit for just field research. It counted as, I can't remember what the units were, but it was basically a full quarter's worth of units because I was supposed to be out in the field the whole time. Yeah, and so in that instance, that's how that worked. That also then meant it added to the cost of the field school because I was paying for university credits on top of that. Yeah. So.
I would just add, it really depends on what you need as a student. Some programs require you to have a field school in order to complete your degree, others don't. I mean, I don't think unless you need to complete a program that you're in, I don't necessarily think you need to feel obliged to have a formal field school as opposed to just joining a project to gain experience. When I'm evaluating applications for graduate education here at the University of Chicago, I do care that someone who wants to do a PhD in archaeology has archaeological experience, but I don't care at all if they've done it through a formal field school or if they've just joined a project and participated on it. I mean, that's more or less irrelevant to me. And in fact, I would think, as Nick was alluding to earlier, often joining field schools adds a layer of cost. So if you can join a project and not have to pay for it, so much the better. And as I say, unless you have to do it that way.
Thanks. All right, our next question is, and I know this is a very variable for experiences here, but what to expect on a field project?
Yeah, that's and I'm conscious of being the first one to talk because I could go on about this, but even just to pick up on the last point, there are going to be different expectations between joining a field school, where you're often talking about a lot of either staff or experts, maybe lecturers, day trips, that it's packaged, partly because you're paying tuition and high costs, but it's really packaged in a way that could be completely different from a small project being led by, a faculty, like a research project that's not a field school. So I think expectations can kind of be calibrated just based on what the project is. And this is going back to what we were discussing of learning about the project and sort of who's running it, what the particular kind of constraints are, or all of that. But I'll just say off the top of my head, right, what to expect on a field project. There is the physical side, right? Really long days in the sun, a lot of work that doesn't even just end when the trench work is done, but note taking. And I think when I thought about this question, a big thing that came to me was accountability for yourself, because you really are now part of knowledge production. You are part of the team that's working, that's creating new data. So it's the expectations are that you're accountable for that work, that you take notes, that you are sort of have a responsibility for what you're doing because you're part of this team that is in the act of, maybe not geophysics, but excavation wise, like a destructive practice. So the expectations are that the work is really a sort of core aspect of it. And that can be really strenuous physical work, but it can also be the work of note taking, of being sort of responsible. Like if you were given a task, you should be responsible or take accountability for that task, right? And yeah, just like an awareness that you are part of now the knowledge production of the project. I think another category of things to expect, depending on where it is living in a place. So expectations of living in a village, interacting with people in the community, locals, like what's the relationship between the project and the place where it's taking place. And then I would say, again, depending on where it is, there's another sort of cluster of expectations about just like what day-to-day life is going to be. Things like access to groceries or access to free time, and having an awareness or working with the project director before you get there to sort of understand like it's 6 days of work and 1 day off, and that 1 day off is half of it is a field trip and half of it is you have a chance to do your laundry, or maybe you don't have a chance to do your laundry. So those sort of things that come up that are quite different from quote unquote normal life. But maybe that's a good place to start, and we can kick it off to James and Nick.
Yeah, Katie summarized it very nicely. Again, there's just a tremendous amount of variability. I took 4 University of Chicago undergrads with me to a project in to my dig, which is fairly remote, rural Turkey. And it was not a field school per se. It's just an excavation that happens to have a few students that I invited to join. And they were just sort of a bit put in the deep end, right? I mean, they were part of the team, as Katie described it, responsible for knowledge generation and therefore responsible for note taking and making sure tasks were completed and so on. And they found that a little startling, having come from another University of Chicago project that was a formal field school, and that was in an urban context in Spain. So a place that is much more familiar to them and was packaged in the way that Katie was describing. So they were kind of had their hands held a little bit in a way that they didn't on my project. And the conditions were much rougher. And, they described it in their Spain on breaks on site having like prosciutto wrapped melon balls. And like that is just not what's going down on my project. So they were sort of startled by that. On the other hand, I think they, in some respects at least, liked it more because it was more, I don't know, they just found it more hardcore. They found it more of a team building exercise. They liked being part of the scientific team as opposed to field school students, but really immersed in the science of it. So right, there's just it can really vary so much project to project, and I think, as Katie also alluded to, it's wise not to underestimate the potential for culture shock, depending again where you're going. If you're coming from the United States and you go to Spain, that's one thing. If you coming from the United States and go to rural Turkey or rural Iraq, it's another kettle of fish. There's a language barrier there that you might not be used to. And it's also part of your responsibility, I think, part of our responsibility. I'll speak for myself as a foreigner. Maybe not everyone here is, well, I can tell many people are not, but part of my responsibility as a foreign archaeologist working in Turkey is to make a good faith effort to learn a little bit of Turkish and to be respectful of local practices and, be a good upstanding citizen. And every field school participant, every archaeologist has to be aware of the fact that you are representing the project every time you engage with people surrounding the project. And it's going to look poorly on the entire team if you say things that are disrespectful, if you behave rudely. And right, you just need to be conscious of the fact that you're representing a group in a way that you're not when you're back home.
Yeah. Again, totally agree with everything Katie and James have said so far. I think the things that I was thinking of just to really kind of emphasize in terms of what to expect, definitely long hours, right? It's usually most projects are in their country, where they're excavating for a short period of time. So I know in Egypt, our work week is 6 days a week, usually with Fridays off. And then even within those 6 days, you're out in the field excavating maybe 6, maybe 8 hours, depending on your project. then you go home, have a little break, and then usually your evenings and afternoons are spent cleaning up paperwork, finishing diary entries, again, that kind of knowledge production and getting stuff recorded. So yeah, it can be a lot of like long hours of just working and yeah, trying to catch up on the paperwork and organizing photos, and doing whatever. And I think the other thing that's important and just a nice reminder for everyone too is when you're on one of these field projects, you're not just a team out in the field, but you're also a team like when you're back home as well, so maybe helping out someone who is sick and needs medicine from a pharmacy or running errands with each other or taking care of the house together, so it's a kind of pressure cooker for team building and team bonding, if you will, these field projects as well. And yeah, so yeah.
That's such a good point. You're in close quarters with a small group of people for a very long time. All of your foibles will become very apparent to everybody. So
Yeah, thanks for that last point. I was going to say the communal living aspect might be the most shocking if you're not prepared for it experience on getting used to a field project. Our next question is sort of about your respective regions, which you've already talked about, and you've touched on a lot of things already, like costs and educational stage, whether you take graduate or undergraduate. But if you could speak a little generally, which might be difficult for some of these very large regions, but who these fieldwork opportunities are mostly accessible to, like as a undergraduate student maybe who only minors in archaeology, are they as equally well received to apply for a project as someone who may be graduate and majoring, or are there other barriers to participation in these field projects?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been said already, there's a lot of variability. Maybe I'll just talk about my own project, a very small project. So while I work with a number of groups roughly at the same time, and like maybe we have dinner with each other every other night, my team itself is quite small. But it's very accessible to, particularly I take UChicago undergraduates, to people who are really genuinely interested, right? So there's an application. We actually just started a major here, so hopefully there will be more applications in the future, but it started as like a small project. And I think it's not as much for me, like kind of what James was saying about a pedigree or something. Like you could be a minor in archaeology and join the project. I think it's more the enthusiasm and the willingness to do the labor, right? And so it's having these conversations with students ahead of time that just as we were discussing, these expectations of a lot of work in a short amount of time, a very intense like month, 6 days of work, like a week. I think issues of funding and accessibility are just going to change via projects. Like there are some projects where there's sorts of built-in fellowships. There are others where you need to bring your own support and funding. So for me, one of the reasons that I keep it small is that I cover everything for the students that can come with me. And that was a sort of choice, like, okay, I want to be able to cover airfare and lodging and food. For other projects, you might be expected to cover the airfare, but everything else is done by the project. Or for some of these field schools we've been discussing, you might be paying quite a hefty sum that covers everything, including airfare. So I think one thing that I was thinking about with this question is planning which fieldwork should start quite early in the year. So let's say you want to work summer 2026. In the fall, like now, should be sort of starting to build up what you're interested in and coming up with projects. James can speak to this, but some projects need to know who's joining their team very early. In the Mediterranean, we tend to not require things like visas to work in places like Cyprus or Greece, but some projects might want to know who the team members are by January, February. So that kind of planning goes into it. Yeah. I'll kick it off to James.
Yeah, like Katie said, I'm currently planning with my co-director our staff list for our 2026 summer field season, which seems really early, and it is early, and that's because that is the law in Turkey. I mean, we just have to submit our full staff list in early December. Also, well, maybe a little while ago now, as much as 10 years ago, Turkey um, created a law or regulation that all projects need to have at least 51% Turkish participants, which I think is in many ways a good rule, and I'm in favor of it in many ways. But it does mean that foreign projects led by foreign archaeologists at foreign institutions really need to be careful about how many non-Turkish citizens they're able to take on a dig. And the reality, unfortunately, is that usually means undergraduates are low on the priority list because, well, I have doctoral students that are writing their theses on the site and they just have to be able to come. And a lot of scientists with a lot of deep training need to be able to come, like other professors from who specialize in the seeds or the bones or what have you. So yeah, it has become, unfortunately, one negative consequence of that otherwise really good rule is that it's become more and more difficult for junior foreign archaeologists to join projects in Turkey. It's not to say it's impossible. And usually the larger the project, the more able it would be for anybody to be able to join. Smaller projects tend to be more limited in their ability to take foreign students.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really great points. And I think some of the things that I want to add, at least from my experience in Egypt, my projects, again, similar to like what James was just mentioning about just our list of participants that we can take on has to be limited because of in Egypt, you have to get permission not only from Egyptian colleagues at the Ministry of Antiquities, but also we have to then get security clearance through the Ministry of Interior. So it is a long process. For a projected season, the following calendar year, I usually apply 10 months out from the start of that project in order to actually make sure I get all the permissions and clearances in line. So definitely, as Katie and James were saying, plan ahead. Make sure to be in communication with potential project directors early on. Yeah, and again, as an unfortunate kind of consequence of that is sometimes the undergraduate student participants end up being kind of on a reserve list or, alternate list, if a project can even take them. And again, it's not impossible and it's not unheard of. So, I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to work in Egypt as an undergrad. One thing, a little tangential, but one thing I forgot to mention earlier that I just wanted to bring up to everyone who's in the States who's interested in fieldwork opportunities. I've had a number of colleagues who have also done archaeological fieldwork here in the United States with different CRM groups. And that's a great way as well to get hands-on experience and learning opportunities as well. So, you know, the kind of romantic idea is you can go abroad and, go to Italy or go to Egypt or Turkey and get to do field work there. But if you're really interested in just getting the hands-on learning experience, you can also do that here in the United States as well. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, the costs are challenging, and I totally recognize that's a really hard thing for students, especially in those like taking out loans or from, different socioeconomic backgrounds. My projects, we do the best we can to support room and board and life in Egypt once you're on the ground at our site. But I know almost every project member I can't afford airfare for, right? I mean, that's like thousands of dollars, for multiple people. So yeah, I usually have my students and my staff, get funding from different resources in order to come join me in the field. So again, that takes a lot of planning ahead and thinking about, not only applying for projects, but then different fellowships or scholarships or resources that are available out there as well. yeah, and I think that's kind of my 2 cents. So.
Thank you. That's been a really nice rundown on some of the considerations. I'll throw in also that in some regions, if there are safety considerations, if the US has put out, especially if you're based in the US or other countries have put out, travel warnings, some universities will restrict, especially undergrads from traveling, if not all of the student body. So this can sometimes be depending, especially ASOR relevant regions in the Middle East and in other regions that may be in conflict. This can sometimes be a barrier for specific seasons. So that's something to keep in mind depending on where you want to work. And I really love the point that you brought up, Nick, about starting off locally, something that might be lower cost. You can get that field work, first field work experience closer and knock out those credits so you can go on to do bigger things. That's a great point. All right. This is sort of a general question, but I'd say beyond your own project, and this we've maybe touched on quite a bit, so this could be some brief answers, but the general landscape for field work for undergraduate and graduate students in your region, maybe sort of the current state of affairs.
So we've touched on the variability of projects. I think in the Mediterranean, and this goes to a point James was saying about disciplinary orientations. So you can have projects that are run by classical archaeologists, you can have projects run by prehistorians, you can have projects run by Near Eastern archaeologists, and that can kind of really change the dynamics. We still have in the Mediterranean big digs, so hundreds of people. It's been running for 150 years, right? It's got dig houses and all of that, and very small projects that are, there every other year or something. I would say another thing is the use of local labor, so workmen, as opposed to projects that are almost entirely international students. So for example, on Cyprus, there tends to be a real distinction between some of the projects run by the Department of Antiquities using workmen or local archaeologists, and then the foreign-led projects, which are composed almost entirely of students of various institutions. So that's just one thing to think about in terms of what you're looking for in a project. And we've talked about, there are projects, again, that are very interested in training, a lot of commitment to the sort of like introduction to field methods, as opposed to others that are quite honestly just looking for labor to get through a season, right? And so I think some of that can depend, like if you're a graduate student and you've already worked on a number of projects, working for ones that have like very specific, like research goals, and they just really need to crack out like a month of work, as opposed to the more sort of like very large field school based projects.
Yeah, in terms of overview of the state of the field, what it's like in terms of field work in Turkey right now. I mean, 2 points come to mind. One is just that it's hard in Turkey. It's just gotten really, really difficult to pull off a project. It's expensive for directors to be able to do, but beyond that, I mean, there's no real kind. I don't know if it's not kind or unkind. There's whatever. The harsh reality is that the government makes it very difficult, not just for foreign archaeologists, but for Turkish archaeologists as well. It's cumbersome, it's bureaucratic, and projects often feel like you're swimming upstream just to get permission to do the work. And that has a trickle-down effect to students wanting to join projects. I mean, it just makes it hard for you guys to be able to join projects as well, because it's hard for the directors to even get them off the ground. That's one thing. The current government of Turkey also happens to be quite nationalistic and generally discourages foreign research in the country, which on some level I do understand, but on another level it makes things difficult for me as a North American archaeologist teaching at an American institution. On the other hand, what I'm seeing more and more is really genuine, productive collaborations between foreign and Turkish archaeologists. I mean, Turkey's a fantastic country with hundreds of universities, many of which have archaeology departments, and there's just plenty of really excellent Turkish archaeologists. And the collaborations, even if because of these new regulations were originally forced, they're no longer, they don't feel as forced anymore. And foreign and Turkish scientists work together routinely on all kinds of things now. And that extends also to field projects. Like yes, Turkish archaeological projects are obviously going to be 95% staffed by Turks, but will often be very welcoming to foreign archaeologists joining them, foreign students, I mean, because why not? And especially if you're a graduate student and you want to write an MA thesis or a PhD thesis on remains from a site, gosh, any archaeologist, any director is going to say, please come. Like, I want people to be pursuing research on the material that we're excavating. So if a student is up for being, the odd foreigner on a project where people are speaking a different language around them, which happens all the time for lots of people around the world in all sorts of different contexts, it's not that strange, then I think there's a lot of opportunities there to join projects that are actually Turkish as opposed to foreign.
I think ditto to a lot of what James was just mentioning for Egypt, but yeah, I think generally for the landscape of Egypt, in terms of field work and stuff, we're generally traditionally the projects in Egypt are kind of like Katie was mentioning, where we have big teams of Egyptian colleagues and teammates who are the actual technicians who are actually in the trenches, kind of removing the deposits or doing the excavating. And then the foreign teams or the archaeologists coming from abroad, or even the Egyptian archaeologists too, are the ones who are kind of doing a lot of the paperwork and recording and documentation and all of this. That's certainly the case for the bigger projects. I mean, my project at Deir el-Balas, the settlement site, for example, we're team last year, I think we were about 74, including all of our Egyptian teammates. The kind of archaeology staff of that particular season, we were 19, and 9 of those were actually Egyptians from Egypt. So I was very proud of that. And so, yeah, there's this landscape too in Egypt where more and more projects are, 50% Egyptian, 50% foreigners. A lot of projects now are being co-directed by Egyptian colleagues as well, partnering with American or European kind of institutions. And yeah, we get the range of project sizes as well. Like, again, I think like Katie mentioned, where my settlement site, that's a team of 74, but the Valley of the Kings project, we have a projected team of 8 coming up next season. Let's see if we actually get the approval for that. But most of the other seasons, it's been 3 or 2 of us. So yeah, it just ranges depending on where you're working, and yeah, so.
Thank you so much. All right, our last question is how should student participants measure expectations for things like excavation roles and as well as things like permissions to publish excavated material? You all mentioned the ability, right, to do a master's or a PhD, maybe based on some newly excavated material. What are the expectations there when joining and attending a field project?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, my first thought at this question is be prepared for the tempos of archaeological work. So moving from excavated or recorded or collected data to publication can be an incredibly long process. And if you have worked with, let's say you're a graduate student and you've worked with a dig director or project director or mentor to sort of have control or the ability to produce research about a category of material, it can still take a long time to see that into a publication. And that's because archaeology, just as we've been hearing, is so incredibly collaborative. It's so many moving parts and pieces. There is this sort of like ethical commitment to publish, and yet there are a lot of obstacles to publishing quickly. And I know that that can be anxious for graduate students who want to get things on their CV and put their name on something, but it can take, I mean, there's just like having a healthy expectation of things like tempos of turning something into a disseminated project, like a journal article or a chapter in an edited volume. But yeah, I think it's, it comes down to taking initiative. My advisor would take initiative on something, working with project directors ahead of time. Not just sort of like joining a project and saying, I get to be second author on something, but actually kind of coming up with research questions as part of a project and working together to find the resources to achieve that. So like the kind of like open dialogue. Yeah. I'll kick it to James to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the tempo. Gosh, I mean, some sites never get published, right? That's how slow they are. So, yeah, that's a very good point to mention. Um, I guess the publication issue is probably less relevant for undergraduates who are less concerned about generating publications. And honestly, I think probably most directors would assume undergraduates aren't going to be part of the publication process, and that wouldn't even cross their radar necessarily, unless an undergraduate spoke up about something specific he or she wanted to pursue. As for graduate students, there too, I have to say, it can be contentious sometimes. I mean, a graduate student and a director might have different visions of who has the rights to control data. Because the graduate student might say, well, I've worked on this stuff for heaven's sakes, therefore I should be the one who gets to publish it. And the dig director might say, well, I funded it and lead this whole project for heaven's sakes. I'm the one who gets to publish it. And both perspectives are in the end valid. And how different projects negotiate that tension can sometimes be done very professionally, very amicably, and often problem-free, but it's not always problem-free. And I think the best way to do that is for all parties involved to be open about it from the outset. So in my project, for example, we've created memoranda of understanding with all of our partners, all of our excavators, all of our lab scientists, that tries to outline in as much detail as we can who has rights to do what. And even there's always going to be things that fall through the cracks. I would say if you are yourself responsible for a written work in the form of a thesis, an MA thesis, or a dissertation, it's very reasonable for you to tell a project director, this is a thing I've worked on. I think it's worth publishing. Do you mind if I do that? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes. Or maybe you'll come up with some arrangement where you're co-authors on something or what have you. But that is a perfectly reasonable request for a graduate student to make of a project. If you are a graduate student on a project and you're, a squares supervisor, let's say, and you're responsible for excavating the material, but aren't necessarily doing research on it and aren't necessarily involved in the write-up of it, then it's maybe a bit less reasonable or less realistic to expect publication rights. But certainly if you're involved with the write-up in some capacity, then I think it's a perfectly fair request.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think those are both great points from Katie and James. As an undergrad, when I was working on field projects, I just never really had the expectation to be able to publish anything. I think as a scholar, I certainly wasn't ready to at that time. So, I mean, just know your limitations. Um, and I mean, I always saw myself on these excavations as I was being employed by the excavation, even if I wasn't, receiving a paycheck or anything. And my job was to do data collection for the project and to, do the knowledge, production in terms of all the paperwork and the photographs and documentation and all of this stuff as well. Um, so I just kind of always went into it with that expectation that this isn't mine, this belongs to the project at large. Um, I will say too, for my field project for Deir Balas, the settlement that I excavate, it's not impossible for graduate students to work on publications with me as a co-author. So I'm currently writing a prelim report where two of my archaeologists are working on that with me. So it is possible. Again, I think like James and Katie mentioned, just a lot of it has to do with dialogue and just talking with the project director and seeing what is possible, what's not possible. And I will just add too that with my projects, what I prefer is my specialists. So those who are studying like faunal remains or botanicals, or I have a specialist in late antique archaeology for Egypt, for example. And what I ask all of my specialists is to at least give me the courtesy notice of if they're presenting something at a conference or if they want to publish something somewhere. 9 out of 10 times I'm going to say yes and not have a problem with it. It's more so just me as the director kind of knowing where things are and where things are getting published, which is something just like I value as a director. Again, I want this stuff out there. I want things to get published, but it's just nice to know where things are. And then kind of related to publication and just expectations too, I think it's just kind of important to remind everyone that, at least for Egypt, we have sometimes some years it's strict and other years it's more lenient, but in terms of like posting photos like on social media, for example, or for versus just like photos for personal use, I think that's always something that's good to run by project directors as well. Egypt can be a little bit strict about what can and can't actually be posted online, and so I always just advise students, if you have a cool photo of you in a trench, just run it by your director, and make sure that's okay to publish online, for example. Because yeah, sometimes if there's like something sensitive or I don't know, this amazing artifact that the ministry has to announce before you can or whatever, sometimes there's just rules that the field archaeologists may not be aware of that are important to run by the project director. So yeah.
Thank you all for all these fantastic answers. I want to open it up for our Q&A to see if there are any questions from our participants here. Please feel free to raise hands or just open cameras and ask away. We also have the chat open. Linda, would you like to ask the question yourself, or I can read it out for you? No sound. Okay. Linda asks, I am a combination of a veteran and an early career scholar. Completing my degree was put on hold for years. So I'm basically trying to re-enter the field, looking for advice for an older student, in quotes, with experience, a specialization, and a strong CV, but a long gap in terms of connections and contacts in recent fieldwork.
Linda, do you want to maybe add the period or region you're interested in, if you have that in mind already?
Ottomans. Cool. Gosh, I don't know if there's necessarily advice to be tailored for someone in that situation, at least in Turkey. I would say, I mean, assuming that you are a student somewhere, which I think I understand from your question, then effectively the parameters for you are the same as for any other student,
Yeah.
regardless of what your age happens to be. I mean, I have a recent PhD graduate who's a senior staff member of my project who was a vet, did several tours in Afghanistan, and then started his undergraduate, I think, at age 26 or 27. And, he found it a little odd. He told me subsequently to be older than his classmates, but whatever, he just did it and didn't bother too much, and went on to do a PhD and is now a postdoc on the job market. So he basically treated it as if he was the same as any other, and was treated as such by projects he joined as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive about that, Nick or Katie. If you feel differently, say so.
No, I think, James, I was thinking the same thing, and even one of my favorite field stories or friendships that I made in the field was my good friend Sue, who at the time I met her was in her mid-40s. She had actually been an accountant for the UN for 20 years and then just decided to quit that job and restart as an archaeologist. And yeah, so we were kind of on the same, even though she was older than I was, she was on the same, playing field in terms of field work and experience and everything. And We had worked on our early project together, or my early experience. And yeah, but no, I would think the same advice that we've been giving to the traditional students, let's say in the group, I would think would apply for you in terms of, you know, talking with mentors and professors and reaching out to dig directors for opportunities, you know. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think James's anecdote of maybe just, you know, digs can be very social. So knowing that there might be, you know, distinctions in positionality between you and other people on the dig, but it's still a project. And I think, yeah, no real, no particular obstacles to people who are coming to field work at a different non-normative, yeah, track.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question from Isa. I'm saying that correctly? We can't hear you.
That's weird. It doesn't look like you're muted, Aisha, but we couldn't hear you even when you weren't.
Still no sound.
Maybe you can type it in the chat.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Aisha.
Well, we're waiting for our next question, and please, anyone else who would like to ask, oh, perfect. Dana, go right ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask a few questions actually. My first one, I know that most of your like advice was more tailored to grad students, but I am an undergrad student looking to like get involved with this. But I know based on what you said, it's a little more difficult to do that in some cases. So I guess I'm more just like asking for like your recommendations on like would you say like go to a field school first or like try to get on these digs like through these like volunteer ways or like does it not really matter? I know you kind of touched on it a little, but hearing that grad students have a little bit of an easier time, my situation specifically, I'm going to be in between undergrad and grad trying to fulfill some experience there, which is kind of a tricky spot. But I was wondering if you guys had any advice on that.
I mean, it's easier for grad students in the sense that they're more often sort of built into the scientific structure of a project because they're also participating in the research of it themselves. But it's still, I don't mean to say that, and yes, Turkey happens to have its own hurdles, but I don't mean to say that undergraduates will necessarily find it a challenge to join a dig at all. There's excavations like around the world. And there's associations like the Archaeological Institute of America, the Society for American Archaeology, ASOR for that matter, I think has websites that I'm about to describe. Anyway, these institutions have websites that you can just go and there's like long lists of the projects that are interested in taking undergraduates to them. And usually in that case, the only hurdle is financial. And if often they will charge a fee that can be ballpark, let's say $3,000 to $5,000, depending on how long you spend there. But if you have money to do that, then it is very, very easy for an undergraduate to find participation in a project somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I'm glad you though brought up the like, are you a matriculated undergraduate student currently, or have you graduated? And then especially for fellowships and things, often they want to see that you're affiliated with some program. And like I know some of my colleagues, like the Spain project that was mentioned, sometimes fourth year students can't even join because by the time the project happens, they're no longer enrolled as students. But exactly as James was saying, there are many projects that still take people. And it's just a matter of, or, you know, in some cases, it's just a matter of providing the cost to get there. And then you're just part of a team. It doesn't matter if you're enrolled or not, you're learning. And this is a case where I would say, yeah, maybe a project that is geared more towards exposing a bunch of different training methods would be great, just to see if you like it, as Nick said in the beginning, right? And that kind of exposure. So yeah, these big databases will often have ways to try to start to filter for quote eligibility for certain projects. Like, do you need to be an enrolled student? Do you not need to be? But the funding is tricky, especially for things like scholarships and fellowships, where they often want affiliate enrollment as a status.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I think trying to do local archaeology stuff, if you're based in the States, could be one avenue. I think, shooting emails to a bunch of CRM groups around and just see if they need volunteers. Then you can stay at home, but then, drive to site or work each day. And then, yeah, the other, like my little mantra is just always cast the net far and wide and see what comes back. If you're open to multiple regions, South America, Asia, Europe, wherever, yeah, just, do your research, see what projects are out there and, who you can email and see who might take you. So, yeah, I don't want anyone to be discouraged by like the three of us talking today. It's, there are ways to work in the field. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
And Reagan just added 2 useful links in the chat for Dana, for you, and for anyone else. So a list of affiliated ASOR projects. So there might be a good way to start looking for something that you might be interested in, and a link for scholarships, which are, I think, all due in February. So there's quite a bit of time to look through this list and apply as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Excuse me, can you hear me right now? Okay, good. Hi everyone, I'm Ayşe, and I'm also maybe the oldest EC early career researcher in this group. I'm 46 and I am also giving classes as a part-time instructor at Bilkent University in Ankara right now in the Department of Archaeology. And I had maybe as a point to Linda's question, I gave a 10 years of gap to my academic career, and I graduated from a BA degree from Bilkent University in 2002, and then after 12 or 14 years later, I turned back to archaeology, and also I gave my PhD dissertation from the Middle East Technical University last year. In relation with this, I spent 13 or 14 years of my career in the fieldworks before the gap and after the gap. And I have been accepted to a research project, which is Common Archaeological Research Project, which is at the North Central Anatolia today, and I have been accepted there in 2017 or so, and I'm still a member of that team. So please do not think that you cannot be accepted in an average age or something. The other thing is that I'm a classical archaeologist. I will be at ASOR as a presenter this year in the annual meeting. However, when I was a student in the Bilkent University, we didn't have any kinds of classical projects. So I was insisted to be a classical archaeologist, and I have been rejected from the ones that were conducted on the western Aegean coast of Turkey. However, my Kinetic excavation director, who was Mary Harriet Gates, invited me to join her project, and she gave me the Hellenistic pottery, Hellenistic settlement patterns, and the settlement layers in the Cilician coast. It was also beneficial for me. I am still working as a classical archaeologist in the north central Anatolia, which is still unknown if we compare it with the ones at the western coast of Asia Minor, even the Mediterranean coast as well, like the Lycia or something. But I found a way to do classical archaeology in these mound excavations, because these were not studied before. These were pretty much unknown items. So I wrote my PhD thesis from Comana's Hellenistic pottery, and I used them as an example. And also I wrote my MA thesis from the Kinetoic excavations as a classical archaeologist. So please try to, I just want to share my experience as well. Please try to concentrate on the mound excavations on the rural parts of Anatolia and other places as well. Maybe you can find a classical or any other specific, for example, medieval layers to be examined by yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we're almost at the end of our session. I don't see any more questions in the chat or hands raised. So I want to say thank you so much to, oh, I have one more here. Okay, let's see if we have time for maybe a quick answer. Bilal asks, actually, I studied BA of Arabic language and literature with Islamic sciences. I applied for many projects in 2024 and 2025 in countries like Israel, Cyprus, and Jordan, but wasn't lucky to receive funding. I am from Egypt and just want to discover it as a volunteer. So please, if any opportunities for excavation, even in Egypt, I will be very glad. I think our panelists mentioned, right, some of these databases that might be available, right, to look online of available projects. Nick, I don't know if you have any quick thing to mention that might answer that question further.
Yeah, no, I think just doing the footwork, Bilal, of trying to research who's, doing excavation work in Egypt and who you could potentially partner with there, just shooting project directors emails, seeing what they have available. Yeah, maybe starting within Egypt where finances may not be so much of a burden as like trying to travel abroad or do excavation work abroad, would be my advice. So, yeah.
Thank you. Parker asked if there are any resources for North American digs. Nick mentioned CRM firms. AIA maintains a list on their website. I'm sure there are others that you can find, but AIA, I think, is one of the major databases for North American projects that are happening. All right, we're at the end of our hour. Thank you so much to our panelists for giving their time and all of their expertise and sharing their thoughts on these questions. I know it can be very daunting to get involved with these projects at first and feel a little overwhelmed about the amount of skills and travel and all the things that need to be taken on. So we really appreciate you easing some of those worries and giving some advice to our early career peoples here. So we'll end the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you at the annual meeting next month.